The significance thereof today. We're very pleased to be joined from our Pretoria studio by Professor Sipho Seepe, political analyst. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. In just a week, the courts have rendered President Jacob Zuma almost completely powerless. First, a High Court judge orders that Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa be the one to appoint the new head of the NPA. And now a second judgment against the president to appoint a state of capture inquiry headed by a judge nominated by the Chief Justice in accordance to the PP's report. What is your reactions to this, Prof?
Well, the outcome is not surprising because one must understand it's the same judge who came up with that ruling. So from the perspective of consistency in reasoning, one would have expected Judge Mlambo to come to the same conclusion. Number one, the issue of asking the Deputy President to appoint begins to get into that space where people find or may argue that it's an example of judicial activism, which would be appealed. I'm not too sure. I also suspect that even in this case, you also have a form of judicial activism, at least from those who see it from the other side. But if you listen to Judge Mlambo, he has actually provided a logic and a lens in which he was looking at this. And that lens falls down on two issues. One is that the president's exercise of power is not unlimited. It must be exercised within the values and principles of the Constitution. That's number one. Then the second one was the issue of a conflict of interest. That if the president appears to be conflicted, and the Judge Mlambo was, this is why he went through the entire report, or most of the report by Dunstan, to say what I'm trying to establish is the existence of that conflict of interest. And in so doing, it will not be in the interest of the public in terms of the notion of justice must be served. So that is one side that on its own seems to be coherent and it seems to be persuasive. But there's on another side that argues differently. That side is the one that sees this as judicial activism, and the judgment of last week is being presented as a judicial tyranny or example of that, where the judicial, or as some people call it, the judicial coup, where a sitting president is being told that you cannot function as a president. So that's the second element. But on what appears today, it's also what the Judge Mlambo did not dwell on. In as much as he was able to quote the Constitution on one side, there are people who are also concerned about the separation of powers. That if you begin to ask a judge to appoint another judge, you are encroaching into a situation where you could be accused of having encroached into the executive space. But most importantly, what is being raised here is a situation where if the Chief Justice appoint the judge, and the underlying argument is that because the president is conflicted, any judge that he appoints might be a corruptible judge. So what Mlambo is also telling us is that you cannot trust the judges that are selected by Jacob Zuma because they are corruptible. So go again to a judge that was appointed by Jacob Zuma, which is the Chief Justice. So there is a breakdown of logic there. If Jacob Zuma, the president, is fit enough to appoint a Chief Justice, and is not fit enough to appoint any other judge, because we assume that in our legal system, judges, every judge must be a judge of honor, of integrity. But it will seem to me there is a view that says any judge that might come up with a judgment that is favorable to Jacob Zuma, that judge is corrupt. So effectively, that also creates a particular discussion that will be very interesting as we move on.
But Prof, this debate, we've had this debate when it came to the Nkandla ruling, where the separation of powers discussion comes up time and again. And of course, as we've heard, the public protector who says this is what the Constitution actually stipulates. So are we who do we then blame for the misrepresentation of or misinterpretation of the Constitution and the law? The president's camp or who?
No, you need to understand that when the Constitution was written, it does not anticipate all forms of instances that may arise in the future.
Yeah.
So this is why this is not unique to South Africa. All over the world, people go to court. You go to the United States that has one of the oldest constitution. When you listen to them, there's still the issue of interpretation of what it means. And the context will define it. And even Judge Mlambo was always saying, when you approach the law, you must also approach it in terms of the context. And you may have two cases that look the same, but you can come up with different judgments because the context is different. So the issue of interpretation is always there. But what is important is when you have a judgment where you have different provisions of the Constitution, you need to make sure that you are comprehensive enough, that you have covered those. You don't select those that support a particular mindset. But also you must also understand that within the law itself, there are what people call schools of thought. There are those who, for them, they see the excess of power as a permanent danger. Whereas there are others who see, when they look at government, they see an executive that is elected to serve the people. So there's always this tension, not only in this country, but all over the world. So the only problem is that when we go to court, we also go to court to find a resolution, an understanding, seeking guidance on an interpretation. Yes. Just like with the Nkandla matter. In the Nkandla matter, you must also understand that there were judges who disagreed with the Chief Justice.
True.
And if these people are judges and they act in that on a daily basis, what more about ordinary people? So the courts are also there to provide guidance in cases there is lack of clarity. And that lack of clarity exists also among the judges.
All right, Prof, we'll continue with our discussion and, of course, looking at the upcoming NEC. For now, that is Professor Sipho Seepe. He was joining us from our Pretoria studios, and we've just heard his remarks on, of course, that court judgment on the State of Capture report.